Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. Wake County is one of the fastest growing counties in the nation, and with that distinction comes growing pains. Overcrowded schools have long been a problem for the state's biggest school district. To solve that problem, the county has had to shuffle thousands of students to schools across the district each year. For some students, that means leaving friends, longer drives, and upended routines. WRAL Education Insider Emily Walkenhorst spoke with school officials and parents about the latest reassignment plan, and she joins us now. Emily, good to see you.
Glad to be here.
Now, Wake County has been sort of a victim of its own success in terms of growth. Walk us through what that looks like in schools.
So Wake County is booming. It has been for a couple of decades, and what that's kind of resulted in is just over time not enough schools opening up. Basically, you have kind of this cluster of schools in western Wake County, Cary, Apex area that are way over capacity. I mean, they're 20% or more. Even a few years ago, some were as almost 200% capacity, 100% over capacity. And nothing's quite as bad now, but there are still schools that are 20, 30% over capacity. They're expecting things to only get worse. And so they actually cap a lot of schools. So if you move into the neighborhood after a cap is in place, you can't go there. Your children have to go to an overflow school. So we see a lot of schools just being over capacity. That's led to some students being moved around to some other places. There's also a high expectation of growth in some other parts of the county. And there has to be some kind of planning for it, especially when there's a lot of growth, but no new schools set to open. So it gets kind of complicated.
Why can't they keep up with growth? You have more people moving in. Doesn't that mean more tax dollars?
It does mean more tax dollars, but it gets a little bit more complicated than that when you think that there's also a lot of really old buildings in the county. So those are people with existing taxpayers sending their kids there, but the school has tens of millions of dollars in renovations. So, that needs to be factored into any budget as well. And then you also think that the cost of everything is going up, and that's where you see bond issues. Not only do you need a huge influx of money to build some new schools or do some major renovations, but those new schools and those renovations are more and more expensive every year. So, it's not quite as simple as if you have more people moving in, you should be able to automatically pay for all of the buildings.
To manage all of this growth in the absence of new schools, the district undergoes this annual ritual of reassignment. How does that work?
Reassignment is a process that comes up every fall. Basically, the school system, a bunch of officials put their heads together and they figure out what they need to do for the upcoming school year. So are there new schools opening? So next year, for example, there's one new school opening in Holly Springs. And actually the year after that, there are like 5 more schools opening. So we'll get another big plan next year. But basically they figure out if there are new schools opening, if there are any schools that are really at a breaking point in terms of capacity. So maybe their kindergarten class sizes have gotten too big. There's actually literally a state law that places a cap on the maximum number of students you can have in a kindergarten through third grade classroom. So they're kind of looking at some of these really high growth areas and they're thinking about, well, what do we need to do to move kids around? There's also another complicating factor that we've seen in recent years is bus driver employment has just come crashing down. I mean, they're short, in theory, over 200 drivers, but they've had to basically reduce all these routes to make sure that all these kids can get to school. We know many are not even getting to school on time because there aren't enough bus drivers. So they're also taking into account how can we maybe shorten some commutes. There are kids who are being bused to schools that are many miles away. And so, reassignment can sometimes change that. Say, hey, you're actually going to go to a school that's much closer to you, which we do know some parents have been asking for. So that is also something the school system considers is what do they literally have the capacity for?
So what would the latest reassignment plan do?
So the latest reassignment plan does a few major things. It has to move a bunch of students in Holly Springs to this new elementary school in Holly Springs. And so I think students from about 3 schools would be moved into this new school. And you basically don't really get a choice to move. You have to move. You can't apply to stay in your current school unless you are a fourth or fifth grader. And I think in some cases, if you're a younger sibling of that fourth or fifth grader, but if you are a 2-year-old who is a younger sibling of that fourth or fifth grader, you're really too young to qualify because you don't currently go to that school. So that's one of the major changes is they have this new school. They're also doing a major change in the Morrisville area where basically they decided that this school, Pleasant Grove Elementary, which is kind of on the Durham County border, they've decided to completely change its entire attendance area. So they're sending students out of that school and they're moving a bunch of new students in. And it's all designed to be a little bit more proximate, but also they're anticipating a lot of growth in that area. So, they're concerned about, how schools that might need to be capped, things like that. But that's a significant change for a lot of families out there, and a lot of them will not have a choice to stay at their current school.
Well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll hear about what parents think of the new plan. Stick around. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL Education Insider Emily Walkenhorst about Wake County's new student reassignment plan. Emily, under Wake County's new reassignment plan, as many as 5,000 students might be sent to new schools. How does the county determine which students move where?
So, lately they've been deciding this based on proximity. So, which families are going to be the closest to the school, or at least closer than families that, maybe new neighborhoods opening up. So let's say you're getting moved to a school that's a couple miles away from you, but a new neighborhood is opening up 3 miles away from that school. Well, technically you're closer than that new neighborhood. And so they're thinking about moving you to that school instead of the one that's a new neighborhood that might be farther away. So that's a lot of the thinking on this. Some of the thinking just kind of changes and evolves over time based on what the school system's needs are. There's not necessarily a draft plan where, at least as far as the school system goes, where they came up with, they knew they wanted to reassign students to a new school, and they came up with several proposals, and then they just picked one. There's not necessarily that kind of process. So we don't necessarily have the ability to see into that and say, oh, well, this is why they specifically pick students from neighborhood A over students from neighborhood B. But we do know to an extent, if you're closer to the school that's now accepting students, you're likelier to get moved than people who are farther away from it.
And what are parents saying about the plan?
Well, a lot of parents, they really like their current school. This is tough news for a lot of them to hear. They want to stay. Some of them will have the ability to stay because their kids are fourth or fifth graders, and they'll plan to do it. But even if they did want to stay at their current school, they're going to have to suddenly have a longer commute time, or maybe they're worried that the bus won't come on time. Maybe they're worried that the new school won't like it as much as the current school that they send their kids to. There's a lot of uncertainty, and so many families are just really frustrated because they're like, I'm involved at my kid's school, I volunteer at my kid's school, and we love this school. Our neighbors go to it, and they want to stay.
Now, you spoke with a number of families about how this plan would affect them. Walk us through what these changes would look like for them.
They can mean a few different things for different people. So let's say you are being transferred to a new school, but you have the ability to stay at your current school. Well, you won't get a school bus to your current school because the school district has said, no, we're moving you to this new school. So if you apply to stay at your current school, suddenly you have to find a way to get your kid there. Maybe your kid can walk there. But in some cases, there's not necessarily reliable sidewalk the whole time, so families are going to have to drive. So I talked with one family. She's like, well, the mom was like, I'm going to stay. I'm going to keep my kids at this school because they happen to qualify to be able to stay. But suddenly that adds 30 to 40 minutes of commute time one way for her to drop her kids off at their current school. They live too close for bus. They're not allowed to get busing. So she's going to have to drive. There's going to be long carpool lines. So that's just one example of, what might happen. They're looking at just, basically longer commute times to these schools.
Why put yourself through the inconvenience?
They love their school. They aren't sure what's going to happen. They are hoping that, or at least thinking, that some of their kids' friends will stay at that school as well. And they really don't want to separate their child's friendships. That's a big part of it. A lot of these parents are thinking about, my child is friends with this group of people. Maybe that group of people isn't being moved. And so, their child would be the only one to have to move to a new school. And so they're really concerned about their child maintaining some level of consistency in their social groups as well.
So what can parents do if they don't like the reassignment?
So there's a variety of transfer options they can choose, and it's which one you qualify for is going to depend basically on your situation. So if you are, let's say, a family in Holly Springs who's being moved to that new school, your child has to be a rising 4th or 5th grader to be able to stay at your current school. So if you're a rising 4th or 5th grader, you can apply for what's called a stability transfer, and that means that you're able to stay at your current school. But if you're a rising 2nd grader, you basically have to go to the new school. But you can still apply for different kinds of transfers. You could apply for a hardship transfer that basically, you would be allowed to, you would say, this particular school doesn't work for me for X, Y, or Z reasons. And that isn't necessarily guaranteed, but it is something that you could apply for. You could apply for magnet schools if you were willing to send your child to a different school, just not the one you were transferred to. But you could, in theory, apply for a hardship transfer to go to the school you want to go to.
Now, many parents have complained to the school district. What has the response been from school officials?
So school officials have answered a number of questions that have been submitted to them online, in online forums. But they really haven't changed course. They're sticking with this plan. They had an opportunity to revise their first draft proposal that they had made public, and they chose not to. They did not make any revisions to draft 2, I think, except to update a number that had been incorrect in it. And that was literally it. So, they seem pretty sure about this proposal, and, they know that it is stressful for a lot of families. And I know they've said, this is not their favorite work. They really don't want to do this. But, it just seems like the arguments families are making are at least not currently resonating with the school system, or the school system is unable to come up with an alternative that they think will work for them.
Well, is there a chance that any of this could change?
So there's another draft process. We're just at draft 2. There will be a third draft. Public comments are you can fill out a form online. You can also go to a public hearing that'll be November 8th. And that will be in person. You can provide your feedback if you'd like to. School system officials are still out there. They're still listening. Every year it seems like there's somebody who pushes back, and there are some revisions that are made. This year we haven't seen any revisions made as a result of any pushback, but there's always a possibility. I know there are plenty of people who still plan on saying something, but there won't be a new draft until November 21st, so there's still time to make changes to it, and November 21st is when the school board is likely to vote on it.
Well, we know that you'll be keeping us up to speed until then. Thanks, Emily. That's WRAL Education Insider Emily Walkenhorst. For her in-depth reporting on Wake County's student reassignment plan, go to the education section of WRAL.com. I'm Jack Hagel. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.